Kilmer,
Maddie.
episode 5.
5 already.
Already, episode 5. Before we know it, we'll be looking back at the time, laughing, going, man, we've got a lot of episodes.
Man, we were terrible.
No, don't say that.
Oh, okay.
That's not true.
We were not very good.
No. But that's just like...
we needed a tune-up.
Need a tune-up. I love seeing the messages come in. We've been talking a little bit about that in the Instagram page, and there's been some comments about the tune-up.
The tune-up. That's good.
So
it's catchy, right?
It is catchy, and I have to be honest. You say it much better than I do.
Well, I've had some practice. That's how Andy used to say it. So
when you say it, I just laugh.
I laugh too.
It's pretty funny. So hopefully our viewers find it funny too, because I think it's pretty hilarious.
Well, I mean, everything needs a tune-up, right?
It's true. Yeah, especially when it comes to paint systems. And I started thinking about this might be a perfect opportunity for a number of reasons to name this episode Tools of the Trade. And I want to throw a quick shout out to our friend Jesus from B&B Detailing out in California. He was one of the first persons to reach out to me and say on the Instagram page that you guys should talk about tools.
Yeah.
And I think there's just a lot of misinformation and a lot of speculation, and then people become, sensitive about it. They grow emotionally attached to a tool, and then the moment someone says something bad or bashes a tool, there's, people get upset, and it just gets weird.
Yeah, it's a touchy subject for sure. So, disclaimer: if we touch on a little heartstrings, it's coming from a good place, and just because we say it doesn't mean we're 100% true. So
sure. Well, and I think it's,
just our opinions, right?
Well, and I say this a lot with detailing stuff. It's about having, finding your flavor.
Yeah.
And there are, a lot of different flavors that, really, that people are drawn to.
Yeah.
And so if it works and it works for you, that's good. Yeah. Right. And just because someone does something a little different doesn't mean that is bad.
No.
And when it comes to tools, I really love your mindset on the tools. And I think this is going to be a really fun episode today to talk about this stuff, because nobody knows them better than you for traveling the country, right? Essentially, we've talked about this before. You fly to a place that that you see pictures of online, and people might tell you have, I use this, that, and the other. But when you get on location, it's different, right? And you, as a craftsman, have been forced to just use whatever you got.
Whatever we have, yeah.
Right? And I think, what better person to talk about this than you? Because that's fine. You might have your biases and say, hey, I prefer this tool over that tool.
Sure.
But you know what? I'm here for a job, and we have to get it done no matter what tools I got in front of me.
Exactly.
Right?
Very true.
What a better person to talk about this than you, because you've had the opportunity to use pretty much everything under the sun.
Yep.
In the rotary world, in the DA world, and in the forced rotation. And I think one of the things that bugs me, maybe it doesn't bug me as much now, but it used to bug me before, is guys not knowing the difference between the three main machines, being a rotary, rotary polisher, DA, and forced rotation. And, everybody just see that it's moving, right? There's hey, the tool is moving. And guys like you and I kind of want to start with this, we learned how to do all this stuff on a rotary buffer, right? That's all we had, right? I mean, back to 1996, the first time I put a buffer in my hands, it was an old school Milwaukee polisher. That's all we had. And it was 1,750 RPM straight up, no speed control.
Yeah.
And that's all we had to buff with. I mean, the body shop next door, they had some pneumatic polishers that they used mostly for sanding. And, the only thing they ever used those for in the body shop was maybe for applying a final wax or a glaze at the end, just buzz over the paint quick. Because those DAs are not the DAs of the modern tools that we're using, right?
No, they were just filling them up and getting them out the door. So,
right. Right. Well, and I really want to get your input on this because when I first started my little YouTube channel, I had kind of intentions to bring on guests similar to how you and I plan on bringing in guests in the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the first group or the first series of videos I did, I brought in Clint Hintz. At the time was working with Buff and Shine, and Clint, we did a 3-part series on buffing pads, microfiber pads, foam pads, and wool pads. And I said in the I said in the video the biggest thing that changed the industry has been the introduction of the long throw polisher and the microfiber pad.
Yeah.
And we talked about this. You guys go back and look at the YouTube videos, but I want to kind of get your input and see your analogy on how we bridge this gap between the old rotary polishers that basically just spin
Mm-hmm.
to these random DA polishers that have this random DA action. I kind of want to talk about what they do well and what they don't do well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what this episode is really going to be today, guys, is tools of the trade. We're really glad you guys are here. This is episode 5. And so let's get into it, Kilmer.
All right.
DA and the microfiber pad. What does that do well, and where does it fall short?
Well, it does well on factory paint for sure. That is 2 things. Is cross-linked is when the paints chemically come together and then they cure, right? All the cars from the factory are all cross-linked and cured, hopefully, right? Most of them are.
Hopefully.
Okay. So they do a great job on that. Where sometimes they fall short is like the super fresh paints, right?
Okay.
The stuff that we've dealt with recently, where it kind of struggles. It doesn't like, the super fresh paints sometimes don't like those really fresh solvents. And I think it's this is my opinion, but I think it's the movement of the machines. These fresh paints really don't like that. Yeah. They like that smooth rotary action. So, I mean, that's in a nutshell, without going too specific yet. That's where I see the tools really fitting in. But as of recently, I've always cut with the rotary. I still cut with the rotary. I think that's, for me, it's much smoother and much faster. I can control it much more, just like yourself, and then tune it up with a DA and be done.
Right. It's weird to think that, having more one-on-one trainings and doing more group trainings, it's weird to think about how, going back in time, how inefficient I was with the rotary in those days.
Mm-hmm.
But however, I appreciate it now because it gave me all that time and practice with the buffer, right? Yeah. All that time, because I talk about this now, and, this morning and afternoon, I had a one-on-one training. It was day 1, and I was teaching this individual how to use a rotary because I kind of want people to know how I learned it through my lens. Yeah. Okay. Because I think there's value there. But, in the old days, we would have a scratch in one spot on the car, and we would 3, 4, 5 step the whole panel because there was a scratch in 10% of the door, you know? And so we did a lot of extra machining in those days. At least I did. In the early days of me buffing. I did a lot more buffing in the early days than I really should have been doing to begin with.
Sure.
Like I said, I appreciate it now. But, the first time someone put a DA in my hands, like anybody, you kind of reject the technology. You're like, no, this isn't for me. I don't want to do it. And you don't, it's annoying. So it took me a moment to grasp that concept of the Rupes 21 ES. But the second I got that thing in my hands and I started seeing how it can perform for wholesale shops, it really enlightened me because with my background, Jason, you know this, I dealt with a lot of wholesale shops, and the biggest complaint was always the cars getting swirled up. And it was basically these guys are out there doing they're not doing paint refinement. They're quickly scrubbing through the car with a rotary and a wool pad to scrub out some scratches, add a little gloss, and send it on its way without picking up any DA to do any type of refinement work to follow up. So the cars are always swirled up because of that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that really just annoyed me because people are just like, hey, dude, there's swirls on the car. And I was like, yeah, we'll put down the rotary and pick up the DA. And guess what their biggest complaint was? When I put a DA in their hand, they would always complain that the scratches wouldn't come out with the microfiber pad,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but additionally that they were going through the pads too fast.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, in the old days, we would be able to get around a vehicle with a rotary and a wool pad and use one pad for the whole car.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now fast forward, and it's just like, do you think, if you're trying to do a big correction on a car, could you effectively get around the car with a microfiber pad and just one?
Efficiently?
Yeah.
No. Looking back at it now, but when I first used the microfiber pad, it was great. It was fantastic. Mm-hmm. I remember we used the microfiber correction system with D300 on the port cable, and it was great. But at that time, I didn't know how important it was to clean out the pads and use fresh pads. You know, we would use one or McGuire's, I think, put 2 in the kit. So, yeah, we've learned a lot since then on how to become extremely efficient with that. Yeah. But I don't think it's the end-all, be-all tool. Sure. I think there are times that a rotary is still king. Yeah. That's just my opinion. But I've tested it out all the way from the very crazy stuff all the way to the most finest refinement. And there's pluses and minuses for both.
Yeah. Yeah. The more I think about it now, I really appreciate the value of having both of those systems, of being able to, operate the rotary with its maximum capacity and then simplify that second step with the DA in a lot of cases. Because you could be surprised, like if you're going to do 2 steps on a car with any pad or product, is it going to be better if you 2-step it with a DA, 2 steps with the DA, or step 1 be with a rotary and step 2 be with the DA? I don't know. I guess maybe the paint system's going to decide. But like you said, fresh paint, it's a little different, right? Mm-hmm. Fresh paint's a little different. But sounds like Buddy needs to use the bathroom.
Yeah, he does. Let me go take care of him.
Folks, at this moment in time, we're going to take a quick moment to thank our sponsors. And at this time, we don't really have any sponsors. If you're just joining us, we're really glad you're here. Kilmer's taking a quick break, Buddy, so Buddy can get a tune-up, right?
Buddy needed a tune-up.
I love it. No, it's I think it's really interesting. I think now this is weird to talk about live, like in the moment, right? Because being around people where we're showing them how to use the rotary for a first time, it's clear to me now that individuals that have never picked up any tool before, they're a lot more confident the first time around with a rotary in their hands versus the student that learned and got confident with a DA in his hands first. And then they put the rotary in their hands second. They're scared. And it takes them longer to figure out the nuances of how the machine responds and how they should position their body. And it's crazy now to say that, like live, like in this moment as we're recording this podcast, that people that don't know any better come out of the gate better than people that have had some experience behind them.
Well, I mean, we've even put that practice or that theory to test with the high school students, right? On the last class.
Yeah.
I made them use a rotary in front of everybody, all their peers, right? And you saw me. I was picking them out of the crowd. No. Yeah, you get over here like this, like this. Dance with it. And they're like, "Oh, this is pretty easy." They didn't know any better. So, again, that is the problem with social media, right?
Sure.
Is where a rotary is a scary thing. Well, not really. You've seen my son Micah run a rotary.
Mm-hmm.
He's pretty darn efficient at it
Mm-hmm.
because he doesn't know any better.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's
yeah.
That is part of the problem that we run into is social media. As great as it is, it's kind of a hindrance in some of these things that we try to teach.
Well, sure. And because and that's why we really get a lot, and students get a lot from group training or individualized training, because it's different when you're in person. On
Yes.
camera, you can make everything look good, and you can dress a set and hide and sneak things in and do different stuff. But when you're in person and your eyes see things that the camera doesn't, you can't fake that.
No.
Right? Like, that's reality.
It
So
is.
when you're up close and personal and you're doing these trainings and you're working with people, it's kind of like they can see firsthand what's good and what isn't good. And I think this is kind of a cool opportunity for me to tell this story, because I just got annoyed for a second that my notifications went off. I got to figure out how to mute those, because my dear wife, she's doing a great job of listening to the podcast, but she says, you got to turn those notifications off on your computer. And every time we start,
gotcha.
I forget. So if you're listening, I'm sorry that you guys hear the little beep in the background, but I'll eventually fix that. So, Kilmer, I want to tell another story behind the shine. Are you cool with that?
Story time. Do it.
All right. So I think probably somewhere around the mid 2000s, like 2008 or early 2000s, right? 2008, 2009, 2010.
That's not early 2000s.
It's not early 2000s.
Early 2000s, like 2003, 2004. But anyways,
when do you remember the DA starting to make impact? Like, when did the DA start making its way? If my memory serves me correctly, I think that the Meguiar's, like you were talking about, the two-step with the Meguiar's cut polish and the microfiber pad system, I think that was like around 2008, 2009-ish, maybe 2010.
I think it was further than that.
Later?
And the only reason I say that, well, I could always check with Jason Rose, but I thought it was like 2011, 2012. I could be wrong.
Well, it was right. I remember us doing the demos with the people from Corporate Meguiar's in the early, I think it was right before I left Pro Finish, and I left in 2010. Mm-hmm. So I think it was starting to make its way to the masses around that time, 2009, 2010. Mm-hmm. And I was instantly I instantly drank the Kool-Aid with the DA, mostly because I was sick of getting complaints about swirl marks and halograms on used cars, and nobody ever wanted, I've talked about this before, is that, like, when you have a customer that's buying product from you and they're buying your buffing pads and they're buying your liquids and they're not getting the result you want, they always put the blame on the person that sold them the goods versus the technicians that used them.
Yeah.
Right. But what they were understanding but not understanding is that most of my customers were commissioned detail guys. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't about the quality. It was about the speed.
Quantity. Yeah.
Right. Like, if you're a commissioned wholesale detail guy, you don't, and you don't have the right lighting and you don't really have the right training. Look, an improvement is an improvement. So you grab your pad of choice, your tool of choice, and your liquid of choice, and you just rub on the paint. Mm-hmm. Guess what? Well, there's an improvement, right? But you don't know what it's doing or what it's not doing. You just see an improvement. Mm-hmm. And so then this car gets, waxed and goes out on the lot and sits for whatever, 20 days, 30 days, 60 days until it gets sold. And then the people start complaining about swirl marks,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I was instantly pulled into that DA landscape just because I was sick of the objections, right? Like getting yelled at. The cars, they're swirled up, and when you have a customer that's buying stuff, you can't tell them that they suck, right? Like, you suck.
Well,
right?
you can't. It's not going to lend too well to your sales.
No, no. So you kind of have to third party sell and say, hey, let me show you this trick I learned online, or let me show you
Yeah.
this little trick I learned from this guy, blah blah blah, and you try to get these guys to do a second or a third step, because sometimes with finishing paint with the rotary, there's more steps involved, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, and
Yeah.
so a commissioned detail guy is not going to take a rotary and do a second or a third step a lot of times, when he can just kind of cut the scratches out and add some gloss to the paint and get around the car in 90 minutes. Boom,
Yeah.
you're out of here, done. You know, so um, that was an interesting time for me where I had to deal with that. So when I got pulled into the DA world, it hit me hard,
Mm-hmm.
because I had a problem, right? And so I think when we started selling the DA and the microfiber system, it was great. Now, the biggest objection that I always found and I always struggled with was the pads to follow, because it's felt, looking at it now, it seemed hard for the detailer to kind of conceptualize that they need to use 3, 4, 5, or 6 pads when they used to get around a car with 1 pad.
Well, and also clean the pad out, right? Condition the pad, clean it out, all that. So it just was a different way of doing it. And it took us a while, and I mean, the industry a while, to kind of come to full circle and conditioned um, to these new techniques. And what do you mean it's microfiber? And what do you mean it grabs and holds?
Yeah.
Everything. Well, yeah, because you're taking paint off, it's got to go somewhere. With a rotary, you're just whipping through like a more like a weed whacker, right? And this is a more refined version of a small weed whacker or a lawnmower. So you have to treat it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And it took a while for the industry to grasp onto that. And that was the detail industry. And then you teach the body shop guys how to use the D, and they didn't want nothing to do with it because it was too slow.
Sure.
It was generally just too, they were like, what do you mean? This is junk. This is not working.
Now, when you mean too slow, like too slow to pull out sanding scratches, or just too slow in the whole process?
Just too slow in the whole process. What do you mean I have to blow up my pad after every pass? Mm-hmm. What do you mean I have to prime my pad with D300 so I can see pink on my whole white microfiber pad? Yeah. What do you mean, I have to, go do a spot and then wipe it off and look? Like, they're like, they didn't
make sense.
It didn't make sense to them.
Didn't make sense.
Not that it wasn't good and it wasn't bad. It was kind of indifferent at that time. And
sure,
really it changed the whole outcome of what we do currently. Mm-hmm. But we're talking 10, 12 years ago. And the microfiber pad was developed, I think over 30 years ago. Right. So, it's been a long time coming, and, we're still trying to figure out the limitations of what it can do and what it can't do. It can do an awful lot, but there's some things in a time sensitive way, right? Mm-hmm. That rotary is still a very efficient tool, and it's not dead yet. And I don't think it'll ever be. No, worldwide, at least, not.
Yeah, I mean, and I want to stay on that path, but before we kind of go back to talking about the rotary, you did mention something, and I like this term, and I want you to kind of elaborate more, if you could, mm-hmm. about the term, the microfiber pad, specifically grabbing and holding, mm-hmm. right? And mm-hmm. and can you talk maybe just a little bit more about why that could be good, or maybe why that could be bad when it grabs and holds in certain situations?
Sure.
Because I love microfiber pads, and I still lean towards wool and microfiber for most of my work. Foam pads I have around, but most of what I do is in the wool and fiber land.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. So microfiber by nature, whether it's a towel or a pad or anything microfiber, microfiber is everywhere now, right? Mm-hmm. Microfiber's design is to grab and to hold on to whatever, and then water releases it.
Sure.
Okay. Sure. So if you're polishing a section, right, say a standard 2x2 or whatever, hard, soft paint, doesn't matter. it picks up that polish residue that we're polishing off the paint. It's got to go somewhere. It goes in the pad. So instead of rolling around like a ball, a section of ball bearings, right, on your wool pad and your rotary, it's staying essentially in one spot.
Sure.
So now you've picked up all the residue, and it's encompassed itself and locked into itself in the polish or compound and the pad. So as you trail along, there's only so much material that a microfiber pad can hold.
Yeah.
And so now you end up scouring. And this isn't my information. This is what I learned from, years of talking with Jason Rose and Kevin Brown. So they're really the godfathers of modern day detailing.
Right. Yeah. But having you in the field frequently, witnessing this firsthand allows you to kind of understand that theory and that whole concept, right? Because it's one thing to like see it and hear it in this podcast and talk about it, but when you see it happen in reality, you're kind of like, it's the aha moment. You go, oh, okay, I get it now, right?
Sure. And paints, I mean, the ultimate judge is the paint. It will tell you what it wants and what it doesn't like, what it likes and what it doesn't like.
Yeah.
And sometimes it likes a short throw DA. Sometimes it likes a long throw DA. Sometimes it likes a firm pad. Sometimes, so it all depends on the paint. There's really no right or wrong answer. It's just how it looks.
Correct.
And how nice you want it to look. And then there's sometimes you can't get it to look the way you want it to. If you're really good, and sometimes it's a real struggle to get it to where you want it to go.
Yeah. And the paint has its own capacity. And so it's like, even though you want to push it a little further, the paint's going to tell you no, like, this is all I got,
this is it.
I'm done right here. You ain't getting any more out of me. It's interesting to think about because, it has its limitations, and I wanted you to touch on that grabbing and holding, because I think that's good to know, right? Fiber pads are super, super awesome. But, I myself kind of like, there was a point kind of going back to that story where I became fearful of the rotary, right? But you have to understand at the same time, this is all I understood, right? I didn't understand the DA. I only understood how a rotary works. I was running that rotary for 15 years before I put a DA in my hands. So, I was looking to solve a problem, but I was also looking for relief from the complaints, right? And again, was what I touched on. I can't tell the guy that he sucks when he's my customer. I just have to try and educate. But even if you know what to do and you have the tools to do it, if you're driven by a commission and your only focus is to get the car done, of course you're going to shortchange things.
Yeah.
Of course you're going to roll over the edge. Of course you're going to miss this spot. And of course you're going to miss this spot. And of course the car's not going to look that good. That's just reality.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't care if you have the best tool in your hand and you're a great detailer and you speed through it, you're going to miss stuff and the car's just going to.
Yeah. I mean, you're on a time crunch, and once you give yourself a time limit, but that's really what made us good, right? Is the time constraints and the using the rotary and understanding how to use the rotary, understand its tipping points and what it likes and what it doesn't like to control it, right? And not have the rotary control you.
Yeah.
That's being loose in the shoulders, keeping it high, nice and tight within your shoulders, and then just being relaxed. If you want to go to the right, you tilt it to the left. If you want to go to the right, go to the left, you tilt it to the right. And we're not talking massive angles. There's times to use massive angles and really get in on it and know that the right side of the buffer is your friend. The left side, not so much.
Yeah.
So it's understanding the dynamics of how that pad rotates and watching it.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the early days when I was kind of teaching guys in the field how to get comfortable with those rotaries, I would look at the rotary because it's spinning clockwise, kind of like look at it like a clock, and your sweet spot to add downward pressure and tilt is between 12 and 3 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, if you get that lift and you get that tilt in that direction, that's going to be your access point, how you can roll over the turns and work the edge. And those simple little mechanics, that little trick really help guys get comfortable, because you see a lot of people pick up the road, it's like chatters,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the how their arms and wrists are turned to create that instability. And it's just a little bit of awkwardness. But once you kind of feel it, right? And it was great today in the shop when I was working with this guy. He's very mechanical. He actually is in logistics and drives a big 18-wheeler, right?
Oh, okay.
And so it was really cool to see him. And you always talk about this in trainings, Jason, when you see guys that have this this kind of intuition, right?
More of a mechanical ability.
Mechanical ability, right? But where they're, if you think about a truck driver that's driving a big rig, they're looking way down the road. They're looking at their exit in case they have to exit the road or they have to make a quick adjustment. So he was working this rotary, first time he's ever put one in his hand, and he was positioning his body and turning and preparing for the drops and preparing for the bevels. And I stopped him. I was like, dude, this is super cool. Like to see him be that forward thinking about like, yeah, I have to navigate this machine into this cavity and roll my shoulder. And he did it like, it was really cool to see. It was like, that kind of made my day. And you might be able to tell I'm getting excited about it. But it's the Rotary still has its place and is still multifunctional. And I think, kind of going back to that story about there was a point in time, probably between 2012, when we started doing setting up the Sears auto detailing. I was trying to remove the Rotary from individuals' hands in a wholesale world, because I was tired of seeing swirled up cars going down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And I would rather have lived with, less cars with all of the halograms on the paint and a few defects, right? Like I'd rather live with a few imperfections in the paint than create more defects that need to be fixed by somebody else in the future.
Well, paint's a catch-22. Do you go a little bit further or do you not? Do you spend more time? Do you roll the dice and say, well, let's go for it? So paint is a real catch-22.
Sure.
You can go this way or this way. Well, the more that you know about yourself and more about paint and how you do things and all that, you may vary. Like, yeah, it's not going to take my lunch today.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I really think there's some value in kind of understanding where, the limitations of both machines, what the capacity of the Rotary can and can't do, and what the capacity of the DA can and can't do. And today, in my day-to-day work, one of the things I really appreciate about the Rotary more than anything is how it outperforms the DA all the time when it comes to edge work. As there's some nuances in ceramic coatings that I was unaware of when I started my business, and we'll talk about that in future podcasts. But, I've worked on a lot of trucks in the last couple of years. A specific one that everybody hates, of course, would be a GMC black paint, right? A good example of this would be, different parts of the country, you're going to travel, you're going to see different paints with all types of different defects. But here in the Midwest, when you get all of the sand and the salt that they put on the roads in the wintertime. So anywhere in the Rust Belt, anywhere around the Great Lakes, when they throw this crap down, and most people are taking their vehicles to a tunnel car wash, right?
Yeah.
And so now you got these stubborn bonded contaminants in these lower sections, and client frequently visits an express exterior car wash where they're spinning brushes at a high RPM and they're driving these it's basically abrasion into these lower sections. Like GM Black trying to get edge work nice and tidy with a DA, all I could say is good luck.
Yeah,
right?
It's difficult.
It's very difficult when you start. I mean, and I'm specifically quoting the GMC Denali with the drops in the fenders and the quarter panels, how they have that little bevel that's only about 2.5 to 3 inches wide. How are you going to stick and roll a 3-inch polisher, a DA polisher in there bonking around? You can't do it.
Yeah.
right?
It's
Like,
you can, it's possible, but it's very, very, very difficult. And the margin of not having it look good is very high.
well, that's something you don't know, right? If you don't know what you don't know, and you
Yeah.
can't fix what you can't see. So if you
Yeah.
don't have the right lighting in the first place, and you know, an improvement's an improvement, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you scrub
Mm-hmm.
over it with something, and you're like, wow,
It's
it looks
shiny. Yeah.
it looks good, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's some of the hard facts of life I had to learn about ceramic coatings, is how they kind of expose some of the stuff that you know, I never learned that from somebody, you know.
Yeah.
And so um, when I started doing ceramic coatings, some of my edge work wasn't as proper as it is
Tight, nice and
today.
high and tight. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and now, like, that's why these people that bring me these GM trucks that they want them paint corrected and ceramic coated, I give them a high price, because the truth be told, I don't want to do them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
I don't blame you.
if it's a 80, 70,000, 80,000, 100,000 mile truck, you're not getting away with two-stepping it and ceramic coating it. And there's been many times where I've had to bite my tongue and be like, thinking in my head, like looking at it, like, yeah, I can two-step this. I can get it done in 2 steps,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it ends up not being 2 steps. It's the third step on that GM black that sends it over the edge. And
Yeah.
if you know what I mean, and so
Yeah.
I don't want to shortchange myself nor the customer. So those GM trucks, I charge more money, and if they don't want to pay, I don't do the job. You
Yeah.
know,
Sorry. Yep.
it's pretty simple, because I just give me anxiety. So I think, like, being able to study that a little bit more these days,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
specifically the edge work. And I like to give this analogy, right? I was explaining this today to my student about taking for example, let's just say we had a coloring book, and we
Okay.
had a blank canvas, and we had black borders of a truck, right? Now you're going to shade in your truck, okay? You're going to
Mm-hmm.
pick your color. Do you want it blue? Do you want it red? Do you want it orange, yellow, whatever? Grab your crayon, and instead of shading to the line,
Mm-hmm.
you shade beyond the line,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And now you got sloppy edge work, and you go and you look at it, you can make out that it's a truck, but it looks fuzzy, it looks
Mm-hmm.
weird, it looks
Mm-hmm.
hazy, it doesn't look right. You know, and you take some of these vehicles where you got buttoned up edge work from the door panel to the door handle to the mirror, and it's that same consistency from top to bottom. It creates a more refined, robust definition. And so when you look at the car, it pops,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You're like the car starts to almost in a way disappear.
Sure. Sure.
And when that happens, that's when you know. And so there's been times in the past where I have shortchanged my edge work. And, you know, of course, the customer is not going to notice this stuff. These are nuances that most people will never see, but I see it, you know. And in the final result, when you do your walk around at the end of the day with the camera, you're like, oh my gosh, this looks really good.
Yeah, or it needs a good tune-up,
Or it needs a
and,
tune-up.
and you've already coated it. And you're like, oh man, a little too late for the tune-up.
Well, it's weird how that is, and you know, and it's going back, and I it's funny now for me to look back and kind of to think now how that there was like 10 years ago where I was like, yeah, it was about 10 years ago that I was a little like fearful of the Rotary, like, no, like this is bad, when it was all that I knew. It was the only thing I knew, but then this new system came to be, and I was like, this is the way. This is how it's got to be done. And so it was cool for me now, looking back, to kind of have had both swings of Erratices. I was like, I'm
Sure.
all Rotary, and I'm all DA. And now, if you ask me, I think, you know, the true harmony lives between the balance of the two. You know?
Sure, absolutely. You know, and you know, not to mention forced rotation. I mean, I think forced rotation has a very specific form. I think it's really good. It doesn't stop. So for the newbies, you can go up into an edge or in a curve, and you don't get that rotational stall. And it's also a much smaller movement, you know, as far as, you know, millimeters.
Right.
So, I mean, that's a great tool too. And that tool is really good for powering through gel coats and
Yep.
industrial type of stuff where you don't want to be swinging a rotary,
It's
way above your head or way down below, or doing a boat or something like that.
sure, sure. And it's funny now, I really just thought of this like the moment you said that, you know, you and I never really used force rotation,
No,
you
I've
know, and
never
I mean
been a
it,
force rotation person myself
and
personally.
and not that that's bad, but
No.
why do you think that is? Is it because we
Well,
were
for me, when the Flex came out, the 3401, which way did it rotate?
it's
That
counterclockwise?
way. So my bad hand, it rotated towards my bad hand,
Oh, I see.
and I
I
couldn't
see.
control it. Or no, see, rotary goes this way. I'm sorry, it rotated this way, so I
Okay.
couldn't control it.
Right. Yeah, it
And
rotated. Yep,
yeah,
that
so
makes
when
sense.
when when Bob Eichelberg was with Flex, he said, "Jason, I really love you to use a 3401." I said, "Bob, I'd love to, but I can't." He
Yeah.
said, "Why?" I said, "It rotates towards my bad hand.
Yeah.
I can't control it."
Sure. How about that? That's
Yeah.
funny.
So
I mean,
that's really
it's not funny. It's interesting. Like
no. I
that's
mean,
it
and
makes
that's
sense.
yeah.
It makes sense.
That's solely why I never got into the 3401. But I had a customer buy one, and he
Hmm.
burnt the living crap out of his car. So it does have power,
Oh
and it
yeah.
has power for days.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
It
it's
does.
a great tool for the begin user to use.
Yes.
It takes a little less. It's more forgiving. I
It's
would
more
think.
forgiving.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it bridges the gap. I like to
it
think that
does. Yeah.
specifically the Beast, the 3401 helps bridge that gap between the DA and the Rotary.
Hmm.
And while I'm saying this live, like without thinking too much about it, like I think the only reason I don't really use force rotation is because I was born in the Rotary land,
You're born a
and
road just
that's
like me.
right. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's kind of all I knew. So like it was more efficient and convenient, and to just pick up a Rotary and do what I need to do with the Rotary. And the force rotation was just never a thing. And actually, I pulled it out of the box today. I have a Rupes Millet that
Hmm.
I never really use.
Hmm.
I was when Rupes first released it, I was on their wait list to get that
Hmm.
machine. So I have, I think, the first 100 or 200 machines that ever were released from the Millet, and I was, because I was into it. I wanted to see what it did, and I loved the Rupes line, and so I got the machine. But to be honest with you, I've never been able to get that thing to ever finish down like well. Like I've been able to get it to cut, like I can get it to cut out scratches, but as far as it comes to finishing, never been able to get a really good finish with that machine, and I've just never liked the sound of it and how it chatters, and just I have it now for training to kind of
Sure.
show what the difference is between the three different functions of those tools. But as far as using it, I don't use it in the shop, and that's probably why, because
Well,
for 15 years or
do this tomorrow during training. Try to finish down with it.
yeah,
Mentally say, okay, because it is different, right? It's not a rotary and it's not a long throw D8.
yeah, yeah,
So, what that to get it to work, you have to do it a little bit differently. So,
mhm,
every action of these tools, um, and even there's either even finer segments
yeah,
because you don't use a 21 like you use a 15 most
yep,
of the time. It's a little bit different. And then from
yep,
a 21 to an 8 mil, you
yeah,
don't use that tool the same either. So there's even minor things within the same movement of the tools.
yeah. Hmm. And that's why we call this advanced stuff, because it's just like, you sit and you have thousands of hours behind these machines. You learn their stupid little nuances and their silly little pitfalls, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
what they do and what they don't do. And it's funny that, we talk about it like it's like, like breathing, right?
Yeah,
But it's just thousands of
second nature.
hours of time behind these machines over, 25 years of doing the stuff. So
Well, it's like your rotary buffer, your big Sioux. Or is it a Sioux
yeah,
or Milwaukee?
Milwaukee.
I mean, that's the original bad boy right there, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people can't use that tool. They
Yeah.
just flat out, you put in their hands and a clunk.
Hmm.
They're like, don't,
Yeah.
you have to just guide it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny today, on that note, right? I never kind of like, it was all I knew. when I first started buffing, that's all I picked up was a big old school Milwaukee rotary polisher. That was it. And so I learned how to manipulate that tool, and the weight of it became nothing to me because
Sure.
what felt, everyone, like a lot of beginners are always like, oh, it's too heavy, which I can understand. It's kind of heavy. But what felt awkward to me was the moment someone put a tool that was feather light in my hands.
Yeah.
Because I was used to putting down some, downward pressure on the tool. But additionally, a heavy polisher is going to plant and stay put. If the machine's really light and feather light, it's going to bonk and bounce all over the place. And today, the gentleman that I was training with, he owns a logistic company, right? And he, and I told him, I said, is it easier for you to drive your semi truck when it's fully loaded and you got a heavy load, or is it easier for you to drive it when the thing is empty and he's
bouncing around?
It's bouncing around, when you have no load in the trailer, that thing's
doing
all over the road.
Yeah. Right.
And so when it's heavy and it's got a load in it, the trailer stays planted and stays put. And that's what I like about that tool specifically, is that when I go into a drop or I go into an area that I need to be cautious, it's very precise and very deliberate. I know when I kind of roll it up on the edge, I know where it's going to stop.
Yeah.
And if I want to push it in there, I can park it for a second. And because of its weight, it stays put.
Yep.
And it stays right up on that edge. And so that's the piece about it that I like, where if it was a lighter tool and you were going to kind of roll up the hill, right, the second you get to the top, it's going to want to push back away from you because there's no mass. There's no weight to hold it in place.
Yeah, the smaller tools are great for like finish polishing, I think, where you don't really want that weight and you kind of cradle it like a baby. Those tools are great for that. But I think they do struggle with some of the, the sanding and polishing that we do on the show cars.
Yeah.
When you're more aggressive on it, they do tend to struggle a little bit. But every tool has its place.
Well, and I want to talk about this too, because as we kind of advance through the podcast, I love the fact that my first mentor always said this to me. He said, get the job first and then buy the tools.
Yeah.
Right. And you see a lot of people going out and just blowing money and spending money on tools. And then we kind of automatically think like, hey, I have this expensive tool and it's something that a lot of industry professional uses. And now because I have it, I'm ultimately better now, right? Or better than I was before.
Sure.
Right. Like I'm better now because I have this tool. And I love the fact that you kind of preach like, hey, like there is value in having a high-end tool,
a quality tool,
right? But as you build your business, like you don't need to bury yourself in debt to go out and spend $7,000, $8,000, $5,000, $9,000, $10,000 in tools and equipment. You can have building blocks, and I think that's super cool because I've been able to see you been able to put a Harbor Freight, Bauer Rotary, and Bauer DA in your hand and get the same end result as someone using a Flex 3401 or a Rupes 21 or a Rupes 15, and you outperform them with a generic tool. And why do you think that is, Jason?
Because I understand the movement. I understand what the paint's doing. I understand my limitations, and I work within all those parameters.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I'm allowing the paint to tell me what it wants.
Yep.
Regardless of the liquid, regardless of the pad, regardless of the machine. I'm allowing the paint. It's the ultimate, right?
Yep.
I'm allowing the paint to tell me what it wants.
Yep.
So with all my years of hours on the tool, I adjust to how the paint's telling me to adjust. It's literally that simple. And when you take that in and you kind of mull over it, because it's completely counterintuitive to what the industry says, right? You have to have this, you have to have this, you have to have this.
Yeah.
No, you don't.
Yeah.
This and these are ultimately what controls the outcome. Yeah. Within most of the time. Not all the time. But I mean, you really control what the machine is doing.
And that's why this episode talking about tools, and it's not, like it's when you spend enough time behind any polisher, you start to know its capacity and
Mm-hmm.
understand its shortcomings and what it can do and what it can't do. And I think putting it all together and using all these tools in different circumstances really allows you to understand it on a different level. And that's, I've been able to rep and sell different tools and be able to work with different brands and different stuff and kind of been able to test them all. And there's some I like more than
Mm-hmm.
others, but I mean, really and truly, I still, now we were just talking about earlier today about kind of the Rotary kind of still being a mainstay. Like it's not going to go anywhere, and it still has its place and it still has value. And I think in my opinion, the real harmony between correction world is learning and understanding how to use both of those and how they all can have kind of some symmetry and a symbiotic relationship together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Between the Rotary and the DA and the force rotation. It's really cool. Tools, these tools, they get crazy. Today, the student I was working with today, he came in with a very entry level tool that he bought. It's a
Mm-hmm.
torque tool,
Mm-hmm.
8mm throw. It's kind of like a Porter cable knockoff. And it has been a long time since I've put a torque tool in my hand.
Sure.
And today I picked the thing up, in class, and we put it down to the paint, and I was blown away at how the motor is underpowered. But I was also impressed that even with a little downforce on that torque machine, it still kind of has a rotation. When you put even at an 8mm oscillation,
Mm-hmm.
when you put the downforce on there, it still has a nice slow spin to it,
Mm-hmm.
But then I picked up the Harbor Freight Bauer,
Mm-hmm.
and I showed him how that works compared to that. And he was like, this is night and day, like way more power with that Bauer than, essentially the torque that we were using in the Bauer kind of like in the same arena, but the motor that is in that new Harbor Freight tool is a lot better.
Oh, it definitely has a lot of spin, and some people and some manufacturers don't like spin. That's fine. Me personally, I want more spin that I can use.
Yeah.
Because I can control it. It's called the speed setting.
Yeah.
But if I've got scratches and I've shown you this right on an edge, I'll tip that 8mm up, crank that thing up as hard as I can, as many RPMs, and just let it float.
Yep.
And you've seen me take out some pretty gnarly scratches right on the edge.
For everybody listening, I watched you take out some scratches on almost $1 million car with an $85 tool.
Yeah.
So, it goes back to the craftsman, and I think I have video of you taking out scratches on the Chevelle at the Roadster shop with that Bauer tool.
Yeah.
And you understand, the tools limitation, and you understand at that point of the process when we were detailing, we kind of figured out what the paint wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So you knew its threshold. Right.
Yeah.
So you kind of going into it, you were already ready for what you could or couldn't do.
Mm-hmm. I always usually have a good idea of which way we need to go.
Yep.
And you've been around me enough. It's just, I can't explain it. It's just, I understand. It becomes
second nature.
At a different
same
level.
thing. Like you look at a defect, and I kind of think that that's a big part of what we talk about in our trainings is theory-based stuff,
mm-hmm.
right? Because I think there's value when you can look at a defect and know how that defect got there in the first place,
mm-hmm.
and where it came from, its origin.
Sure.
And then what paint systems it's in. Before you even pick up a tool, it's already kind of the end result is already played through in your head. You're like, I know I need this, I need this, I need this, and it's going to look like that. It's
mm-hmm.
You already walked through the whole thing before you even started. And that's thousands of hours on the job.
Yeah. But my preferences have changed. I used to be a 21 guy with a 5-inch plate. Mm-hmm. Nothing wrong with that. But now I personally prefer a 15 mil with a 5-inch.
Yeah.
To finish down. So my preferences have changed. But again, back to the, what tool is better than what or what brand. If you're polishing all day long, typically a cheaper Chinese tool is going to have its shortcomings.
Yeah.
usually in comfort, a different harmonics, balance. Those things aren't built into a cheaper tool, and it's not. They're cheap tools for money purposes,
Right.
finances. So a tool company can only put in so many good stuff for a price point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what it is.
Sure.
And it's just, if the tool works, the tool works.
Yes.
Doesn't matter what the brand name is.
And understanding how to manipulate it
Mm-hmm.
is an important piece. It's funny that you were talking about this, because I think this is important for people to know. Like, all right, last year, or I should say, it was through the calendar year of 2021. I had gotten a Bigfoot 21 Mark
Mm-hmm.
III,
Mm-hmm.
and I had hot rodded it with a 5-inch plate, right? And when you think about that 21 millimeter oscillation kind of bonking left to right, right? And it's crazy oscillation. What it did is it was great. It was hot rodded and modified, but also because of that wider oscillation of the 21 millimeter, it created a lot more feedback that my
Mm-hmm.
left hand had to control and fight.
Mm-hmm.
And so a year's worth of kind of fighting this DA,
Mm-hmm.
of trying to get the maximum correction I could out of this
Mm-hmm.
DA, it threw a lot of feedback down my arm, and I developed kind of a golfer's elbow because of it.
Yeah.
And so now I've kind of gone back to my roots. Now, when I'm doing 2-step or multi-step corrections, I put the DA down, and it's all rotary first, because the rotary is smoother. It creates a lot less tension on my arms and my body and my elbow. And I kind of rock that rotary around, and I do all my defect and scratch removal with that. And then when I pick up my DA, it's downhill. It's a breeze, right?
Yeah.
I've done my heavy lifting first with the rotary, and I can come through and be a lot more smooth and a lot less literally personal physical effort with the DA.
Yeah.
And it just is easier all along. Let the tool do the work instead of my body doing the work. Yeah, I know how to manipulate the DA and cram it in the corners and let it spin, but I'm exerting a lot more physical energy to do that. You know what I mean?
So do this tomorrow. You still have your 6-inch plate for your Rupes, your 21?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, of course.
Put that back on it.
Yep.
And see if it's a little less. I bet it is, because that tool is designed for a 6-inch plate.
It's correct.
So it's going to be a little bit smoother to use. It's not going to take all that feel away in your arms and your shoulders and your ears, but it's going to be a lot less, I think.
No, it's funny that you say that, Jason, because I have 2 of those Rupes 21s, and I have one with the 5, and I have one with the 6-inch pad. And that 6-inch pad balances out that surface area.
It does, yeah, and that's what it was designed for.
And that's what it was designed for, and and that's why there's that balance between the two, and having that 6-inch and the 15, there's value, and that's why I have lots of tools, and that's why we use lots of tools, and that's why people that have seen us do corrections and seen some of these bigger jobs, you never know what the paint's going to want, and you never know what tool you might need. So having the capacity to grab other machines in a moment's notice, it allows you to get the job done at a faster rate, which ultimately leads to making more money.
So, last question, because I think we're up on time. Maddie?
Yeah.
2 tools. Yeah. If you were on a desert island with every car imaginable, right? Big island. What's your two tools?
Give me my original OG Milwaukee Rotary Polisher. 1,750 RPMs, straight up, no speed control, and a Rupes 15 millimeter. I'm good to go.
Okay.
That's it. That's all I need. Those are my 2 tools. Milwaukee, so I can power through the scratches with the rotary, and my Rupes, so I can do my refinement work. Call it good.
Yeah, I'll probably go with, I love the Makita, but I'm a DeWalt rotary guy. So I'll probably go with the 849 XP, I think, with the black rubber handle.
Yep.
And a DA, geez.
Nail biter.
Yeah.
Here we go. What
Gosh,
is it?
You know what? I don't like chords anymore.
I know.
Yeah, that's a toss up between my Milwaukee 15 or a Rupes. I'm going to go Rupes 15 because I do get a little bummed out about changing the battery out, even though I
Yeah.
love it when I polish in little small areas.
Yeah.
Um, but the corded tools just I don't have to change batteries, even though
Sure.
you get the cords tangled up. So I'm going to have to go with a 15 Rupes
Yep.
Mark III.
Well, it's funny. I mean, we want to keep these podcasts around the hour mark, but if we go another couple minutes, I don't think our viewers will mind. But
I don't think so.
I wanted to touch on this because today is when I actually picked up. Well, no, it was not today. It was yesterday when I actually got my first battery powered rotary,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm really excited that I have it. And I think battery powered tools have their place. But before we sign off today, I wanted to kind of like personally, I'm never going to go one direction or the other. I'm never going to be all battery powered or all cords. I think they have their places. And with us doing the schools in the future with the high school, we're looking for sponsors. And so you and I have been doing some vigorous testing on a lot of different tools.
Mm-hmm.
Battery powered that because for training purposes, battery powered tools are nice because you
It is
work
nice.
for
You don't have cords all over the place getting tangled up, and that drives us nuts, right?
exactly right. Because I mean, in class when we're training, it's kind of like we work for a moment of time, the tools
Mm-hmm.
go down, we come back and we talk, right? And then we work for a moment of time, come back and we talk. So I think I want to understand the cordless technology a little bit more than I do today. And I think as that technology evolves, it's going to get better, just like it always has with other
Sure.
tools. But they have their place. So
Of
I
course,
picked up.
everything has their place.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of like exterior one-step enhancement, whatever you want to call them. There's a lot of times where I have to go around the car, scrub out the hot spots quick with the rotary where there's heavy scratches, and then I kind of power through my correction with a one step with a DA. So I want to try this DeWalt rotary that I got to see how that works in the future. You'll get to try it here in a couple weeks, and
Yeah, I'm
we'll be doing a lot
excited.
more tool testing. And I know based off of this podcast today, I had a lot of fun kind of talking about tools. I hope everybody listening kind of engage. And if you guys got questions, please message myself, message Jason. We'd love to talk to you guys more about the tools. But this was fun, Kilmer.
It was a good
This
time.
was episode 5. Tools of the trade. Is it a rotary, a DA, a forced rotation? They all have their purpose. They all have their value, and they all make sense. So I'm glad we got to do this today. I hope our viewers like this, and if you guys have any questions, please send them over to us. And I guess that's it, Kilmer.
That's
What
it.
else? What else do we need to say before we sign off for today?
Needs a tune up.
Tune up.
Tune
It's a
up.
tune up. It's a tune up. Guys, Kilmer, I really appreciate you being on the podcast today. This was awesome. We got a couple more of these. This is episode 5. We have a few more episodes before the year ends, before we start bringing on guests, and we'll be making some special announcements on who our guests might be coming into next year. So stay tuned.
Stay
for the
tuned.
tune-up. Stay tuned for the tune-up.
Oh, with a couple of guests I talked to today, we'll be definitely getting a big tune up. So,
Oh, man. I'm looking forward to it. Well, Kilmer, you are the man. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today, and I look forward to seeing you in a couple days, and I look forward to seeing you on the next podcast.
yeah, thanks, guys. We appreciate it.
All right. See you guys later. Take care, and we'll see you next time.